Greetings, I'm Shan, and this is part 2 of my realism and practicality review of the Imperial City from the video game The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Now, why is there a part 2? Because I have already made a video on the Imperial City. Well, because more needs to be said. So far in my castle or castle-like structure reviews, I haven't needed to do a part 2. That doesn't mean that I haven't missed things. I am not infallible, of course, so one or two things go under the radar in my reviews. That's just, you can expect it. But when I notice that there are several things that could have been pointed out that are particularly informative for castle-like defenses, and there is, several of them, well then of course, I feel it's necessary that I make a part 2 to share some of these really cool facts with you. Now, looking at the Imperial City, we see that it has some intermediate towers around its perimeter. The issue is, these towers are not fulfilling the function that they're supposed to. The problem that we see with the towers here is that one, there's not enough of them, okay? And the next is that they are recessed behind the wall. If you have a look at any historical castle, you will notice that the towers actually only sit halfway into the wall. The other half sits forward out of the wall. Why is that? Well, there's a very good reason, and it comes into the reason why there aren't enough towers on the Imperial City. And it's the matter of having a good field of fire for the defenders atop the wall. If you were to have a look at the Imperial City, and look at the city from above so we can see how its circular design is going to affect the defenders' field of fire. So the defenders could have either bows, crossbows, or even magic, but you can only fire at things that are within your sight. And the natural curvature of this wall means that the attackers that are trying to assault the walls, if they are a decent enough distance away from a specific defender, they can actually receive cover from the curve in the wall itself. Now, not all castle walls were curved. In fact, most castle walls are actually straight, and then they just have corners to encircle and make the full connected castle wall complete. And what you'll notice, and this point is significant, which is the whole reason why I'm describing this, is that on each corner you will see a tower-like structure. And the reason being, if there are defenders on one of these sides of the walls, as soon as you go around one of these corners, the wall itself will be providing cover for any attacker that is around that corner. So the same principle applies with straight-walled castles and circular defenses like the Imperial City. So the way to fix this, to give the defenders a much better field of fire so that they can fire down on a larger number of enemies at a greater distance from where they are located, is by adding protrusions that extend a little out of the wall. Platforms where the defenders can stand upon to receive an increased field of fire. There are actually different types of protrusions that form this function. The most common that people are aware of are, of course, towers. Towers increase that field of fire, and with additional height, more so. But they don't always need additional height, nor do they need to be complete towers. If the wall is big enough that it doesn't have to worry about any type of fire from behind it, the tower can actually be a half tower. Other terms for a half tower is an open tower or an open gorge tower, and in situations where greater height wouldn't really add any additional advantage for the defenders, it didn't even need to be a tower, it just needed that protrusion-like section. And when that was done, this is what is called a bastion. A bastion is like a half-circular tower that is at the same height as the wall it extends from. So if we were to look at the medieval township/city Carcassonne, we will actually see an example of every one of these protrusions from the walls. There are complete towers, there are also half towers or open towers, and there are also bastions that are only as high as the height of the wall. And what you'll notice here is that every section of wall on Carcassonne is actually made up of a straight and flat section of wall, so walls rarely truly curved, and on nearly every single corner you will have one of these protrusions, tower, half tower, or bastion. Now there are some corners that don't have them, granted, but in most they do, and that is the principle that we need to understand. And also in the sections where there are corners that don't have tower-like protrusions to increase the defender's field of fire, what you'll notice is that there are other sections near them that increases field of fire already, like a higher portion of wall right near, or even a smaller turret. Going back to the Imperial City, we see that there is nothing like that here. The towers that are there are sitting too far behind the walls themselves to offer the advantage that they are supposed to give. So what we need here is additional towers or even bastions, because it's a pretty darn high wall already, at intermediate points along the curvature of the wall. How many? Well, a really good way to measure this is that one bastion tower or whatever could actually fire in a straight line to the next one, or each tower or bastion that is adjacent to it. As soon as a corner or curvature in the wall moves a tower or bastion so much around that corner or curvature to the point that you couldn't fire an arrow in a straight line and hit it, you have a weak point in your defense. And so that is how you would measure how far apart these towers need to be, and also how many, the quantity, the number of towers or protrusions should be on and around a castle or castle-like wall. Now, in the comments of part 1 of my review of the Imperial City, some people have pointed out and said that the sewers, or the accessway through the sewers, is a big defensive weakness. That is kind of yes and no. You see, on real historical castles, they had alternative entrances, okay? Back doors, if you would, and they are called the postern or sallyport. The interesting thing about these secondary entrances is that because they're so small, they're actually very easily defended and rarely ever assaulted with any massive intent. Because they're so small, they'll bottleneck the enemy. There are usually defenses like battlements right above where they come out, and being so small, they can actually have really thick metal grates, fixed to them. So the sewers, not necessarily as big a problem as people say if it was adequately defended. So you would want a couple of, guards there, big solid grates to block off access. But we do know from playing the game the sewers aren't constantly guarded. So yes, it could be, a weakness. Because we do have examples in history where the postern or sallyport of a castle was opened to the enemy by an infiltrator or spy within the castle itself. But that doesn't mean they should be taken away. If you're in a siege and the main gate is, completely walled off by barricades and whatnot, it is very useful to have a back door to sneak supplies or even reinforcements in and out. But then you might say, well, why doesn't the enemy just barricade the posterns as well? Well, of course they would have done that. It's just easier to sneak out a small door than a very large door that, probably makes a lot more noise in raising the portcullis and opening the, big gates, lowering the drawbridge and stuff, than just sneaking out a small back door that just requires being opened and shut. The next interesting part about the weaknesses of the Imperial City are actually all the trees that are around on this island and in such close proximity to the wall. These trees would provide decent cover for anyone trying to attack the city, so if they were serious about being able to repel attackers and not give them any advantage, they would clear the area completely in the close proximity of the walls. Something I also mentioned in part 1 of my review of the Imperial City is that the accessways between the Wizards' College and the prison needed to be defended, and I showed how I would say I'd put a wall there. I actually want to show an improvement, the proper way you would want to do this. Instead of one single wall, you would actually have 2 walls, okay? And in between those 2 walls would be the access for the citizens to get from the city and the other areas. This is important because it makes a division from the battlements and the civilian access. Also, if the city is ever breached on its ground level and anyone is trying to move in between these areas, the actual lower access way that the citizens would use would be a complete death trap from the 2 walls on either side high above. They can just rain down arrows and death on anyone trying to go in between. So, 2 walls, much better. The other issue with the Imperial City is that there is so much purchase all around it. So this island, there's a lot of areas where the enemy, once they cross that water, like I mentioned in part 1, can then rally, build up their offences, and then charge in. There should really be defences along the shoreline of this island, whether watchtowers or indeed a whole nother outer wall that just encircles the island completely. This would also provide provision for the city to expand. And finally, let's look at the main central tower of the city. Is this a defensive strength or weakness? In my opinion, it's kind of neither. You see, the walls of the Imperial City are really, really big, much bigger than what it seems to be like just looking at the whole city from a distance. And in terms of the standard ranges of trebuchets, and trebuchets really are the big siege weapon of the medieval period. In terms of standard trebuchet ranges, I don't see them being able to bombard that tower from a safe location. If they got close-ish enough to those walls, I reckon then their range could be close enough to hit that tower, but that puts them at, I feel, in range of the actual external wall. So the trebuchet would actually want to be far enough away from any, range of fire from the walls, which would most likely put them out of range to hit that tower. And having said that, that would also make anyone on that tower out of range to be able to strike down and hit anyone or siege engines outside the city. Of course, that doesn't account for magic, and if magic has limitless range, it can just fire in a straight line. What I said doesn't apply at all. But in terms of medieval sieges, this tower, not really much of a problem, but it looks cool, you see, and so because it looks awesome and it's supposed to be the palace section, yeah, I would definitely keep it in the Imperial City. It's basically the main, most impressive feature of the city as a whole. And there you go, this has been part 2 of my realism and practicality review of the Imperial City. Thank you for watching, I do hope to see you again, and until then, farewell.